my host at Whiteland, OpenRME, and a then postdoc with URM who's now at STS. Though the principal thing that I want to talk about in this talk is monopole operators, but I just start with a general Chern-Simons series and very some things that people have done and the logs and dualities and so on. Okay, so you want to consider gauge series in 3 dimensions. Now, as usual, if you have studied gauge series in 4 dimensions, you know that the usual gauge series are written with the usual F square term. But in 3 dimensions, you can write down gauge series with a special kind of kinetic term, which is called the Chern-Simons term. Which is here. Now, this term has a special property. Okay, let's compare. Let's first look at the usual Yang-Mills or F square term in 3 dimensions. The gauge coupling is dimension-full there. So using that thing, using the usual F square thing, you cannot easily imagine finding any perturbative fixed point in 3 dimensions. It could be that if you flow for long enough, you may find some fixed point, but perturbatively you won't find it. But this Chern-Simons term in 3 dimensions, if you look at it, you'll see that the integrand has exactly dimension 3 because gauge field is dimension 1. So this is dimension 3 exactly, and this action is marginal. Okay. But if you look at it carefully, you'll see that there are A's appearing without derivatives all over in this thing. So this thing is not gauge invariant in an obvious way. So you could ask what is the gauge transformation of this thing. You see that if you do gauge transformation on this thing, then it gives a total derivative. So this is gauge invariant up to total derivative. The thing within the integrand itself is not gauge invariant, as is the case with F square, but the whole action by itself is gauge invariant up to total derivative. Okay, so say that this is on the small gauge transformations which are continuously connected to identity. This is gauge invariant as an integral. But there are large gauge transformations which are not continuously connected to identity, and under those gauge transformations, this is not again invariant. It gives some extra terms for whom to vanish to have this thing invariant under those large gauge transformations. Gives you a quantization condition on this Chern-Simons level K, which are here in front of this. This thing is essentially the coupling of this theory. So this is a theory in which you have a marginal coupling which is quantized because of gauge invariance. So the coupling cannot run continuously, and hence its beta function is 0. There can be finite shifts at one loop and so on, but this cannot run continuously. So using this gauge theory, you can imagine you can construct conformal field theories easily in 3 dimensions, which were constructed and studied in great detail by Shirag and collaborators. Yes, and essentially solved in the sense that finding out their thermal partition functions and correlation functions rather. Now, what are some special properties of these Chern-Simons theories? That if you look at the equation of motion, you can just say that the peak strength of this thing is 0, gauge field is 0. You say that there are no local propagating degrees of freedom of pure Chern-Simons by itself. But you can couple these theories to some either scalars or fermions, let's say in transforming in fundamental representation. In such a case, this theory becomes non-trivial in the sense that now there are propagating degrees of freedom, in particular the matter ones. Now, this kind of system, these Chern-Simons coupled to scalars or fermions, they have a lot of applications in condensed matter as well as in string theory motivated examples, for example, M theory and so on. In theory of membranes. So I would ask, how do you study these theories? Is there a perturbative limit in which you can study this? As I said, that K is 1 over K is essentially the coupling in this theory. So if you are at finite time, you can take K to be large, and then the coupling of this theory is 1 over K, and you can study these things perturbatively in 1 over K at finite time. But there is another kind of limit in which you can study this thing, which is the too large limit, in which you take n to be large, so you are working with UN gauge theory. So you take n to be large, you take k to be large, but you keep this ratio, the tooth coupling n by k fixed. Okay. So in this particular limit, with matter in fundamental representation, there has recently been, last few years, there has recently been a lot of progress. People have been able to compute the partition function of this theory, correlation functions, exactly as a function of this tooth coupling. So now you have like non-supersymmetric theory which you can study exactly in coupling constant, which is not a very common thing that you see in physics. So these various things which we have done are thermal partition function, correlation function, scattering amplitude, and then their relation to, the relation of these theories to Vassiliev theories, which are like higher spin theories in ABS4, and their holographic views.
So the way I know that this n over k has to be kept fixed is roughly that there's a k sitting outside, and there's a trace. So the trace is like an n, and I know that overall this thing should be like n square. So k should go as n. Is that roughly the idea?
Okay. Now, out of all these various things that people have studied, one of the fascinating things that has come out of the study of these theories coupled to bosons and fermions is the following. Is the statement of bosonization duality. What is this? So you take a Chern-Simons theory, couple it to critical bosons. You can forget for now what a critical is, but let's say just consider theory of bosons. Okay. And then you can also couple another Chern-Simons theory to fermions. Take the large n limit of this thing, Tooft limit, okay, and then under the identification of the bosonic Tooft coupling and the fermionic Tooft coupling, if they are related by this relation, then in the large n limit these theories are dual to each other, in the sense that their spectrum of operators or states is exactly the same. Their correlation functions exactly as a function of this coupling are same, and partition functions match, and scattering amplitudes they match. So there is a lot of evidence about this bosonization duality at infinite. So working in the Tooft large n, there's a lot of evidence for this duality. This essentially is saying that a theory of bosons is dual to a theory of particles. Of course, by completely Chern-Simons.
So when you say critical bosons, that's the theory which is at the Wilson-Fisher fixed point, and these fermions are the free massless.
That's the free massless.
And there is sort of similar the other way around.
The other way around version is also there. That you can take fermions deformed by this size to the power 4 thing, and then you have regular bosons, and these things coupled with Chern-Simons, that gives different levels, dual range. And the same, all the good things that happen here, in the partition function, the spectrum, the correlation function, everything happens there. Okay. But all of this evidence for this thing comes from large and Tooft limit computations. You could ask, can you say anything about, what about if I move away from the Tooft limit?
Just one comment, the one that Gautam was asking about, the free bosons and the critical fermions. Each of those have a relevant operator. The free bosons have a relevant operator under RG flow that can be tuned to go to the critical boson theory. And the critical fermions have a relevant operator, which under RG flow can be tuned to go to the free fermion theory.
Right.
And in fact, the whole RG flow is dual.
Okay. Yes. So now, what about finite time? So there are some sort of indirect evidences that this bosonization duality could also be true at finite time as well. And this evidence comes from the relation of this bosonization duality to some known level rank duality of pure Chern-Simons theory. So in pure Chern-Simons theory, there is a level rank duality which says that if you take pure Chern-Simons theory based on gauge group UN with some level k, then it's exactly same as UK Chern-Simons area at level minus n. So, you can start with the bosonization duality, that is, one side coupled to bosons and another side coupled to fermions. So you can, in this theory, you can turn on masses for these bosons and fermions. The masses of these things are dual to each other. So you can turn on masses and then integrate out these, matter particles from here. And then in the deep IR, much below the mass scale, you will get pure Chern-Simons theory. Now there is a small shift of NF by 2 here compared to the level rank duality, and that's because when you integrate out fermions, massive fermions, you get a Chern-Simons term for the gauge field to which these fermions were coupled. And a single fermion gives a level shift of half, so NF fermion gives a level shift of minus half. So when you integrate out, this thing is gone, and then you land on this level rank duality. So this is related by an RG flow, massive RG flow to level rank duality, which is known to be true at finite and infinite scale.
So this negative level is only a formal thing or what?
Yeah, level can be negative.
Level can be.
But that's an independent state. This part is independent.
This is independent statement. So these theories are like just pure Chern-Simons theories.
Okay.
There are no local degrees of freedom. You can solve them exactly, and you know that these.
Wait, the level being negative means that the corresponding Kac-Moody algebra at the boundary is non-unitary. I mean, it doesn't have a unitary representation.
The Kac-Moody level is related to the model.
Model.
It's you can see that nothing can go wrong with negative level just from the fact that parity transformation takes k to minus k. So it's just
what is the absolute significance to say that it goes to minus n?
It's just that if you're using the same parity frame on both sides, okay. So it's not very significant here. However, in a theory in which there are fermions, the fermion mass also flips sign under parity, and then k times fermion mass is parity invariant. So the relative sign between k and mass is physical, and there it has very important. So one should keep track of it.
In given Kutazoff duality, we take lambda to minus 1 minus lambda because this transformation.
Giving Kutazoff duality can also be stated directly in terms of k and n because these are valid at finite and infinite k as well. This is the finite and finite k version of giving Kutazoff dualities.
I see. I mean, suppose n is large.
Yes.
So then you take lambda to 1 minus lambda. So what I was wondering that in the above case, I mean, this pure Chern-Simons theory, you take lambda to minus 1 by lambda, something like that, to realize the duality transformation.
You're asking what is the large n version of this?
Yeah.
I think the large n version is probably just
Lambda goes to minus lambda.
There is lambda goes to 1 over lambda, minus 1 over lambda.
Yeah, but that's okay.
It's because of the difference between. What his question is that look here, there it looks like k minus n, where there it looks like uk. Why?
Because you have to integrate out some matter from here, and that matter contains fermion. When you integrate that out, this factor is gone. So there are two kinds of things. One is like matter fermion, and then this is supersymmetric. There's gauginos as well, and you have to when you work with this theory, you have to choose some regularization scheme. And the usual regularization scheme is the Yang-Mills regularization, in which those gauginos are dynamical, and when you integrate them out, they cause the shift of n. So so this is again true that these Gibbon-Kutazoff dualities. Okay, so let me just again state this thing. So these Gibbon-Kutazoff dualities are dualities in n is equal to 2 supersymmetric version of the Chern-Simons coupled to scalar or Chern-Simons coupled to bosonic fermion. So these dualities again, these are known just because of fact they are supersymmetric and they are known from frame construction and so on. These dualities are known to be true at finite and finite k as well. Now within these theories, you can add massive deformation. You can remove these matter multipliers by adding mass terms for them, and then you will again flow to these pure Chern-Simons dualities.
Once you integrate out the gauge.
Once you integrate out the gauge.
what is KNA? Sorry.
What is
KNA, if I understand the
it's
number
just
of layers.
number of fundamental. Okay.
Oh,
You can fundamental and anti-fundamental.
So 4 has more information than 3 in the sense of duality. Far. You recover
more general.
Yeah, more
you can
general.
start from here and then flow to this
Yeah.
one.
4 is much more.
Yeah.
4 is the duality of physical theory.
Yeah.
3 is the duality of a topology. It's almost not there.
Yeah.
So,
Just to clarify about Shubhaji's question, this is very confusing. There are 3 things that people call K. Okay? And I think it's sort of useful to just keep in mind what is the what is the rank, what is the level of the dual Wessovian theory. So in the thing that in number 3, K for Tarun was what will become the level after modulus of the Wessovian theory. Then in Wessovian theory, there's this other thing that people often use, which Witten always calls a kappa. I think it's useful to call kappa, which is K plus N. Sometimes people call that K. And then there is the K of the supersymmetric theory. And all these 3 are different and have an interplay with each other. And different formulas use different quantities.
Okay. So, again, like these finite and dualities, since they are connected by RG flows to your bosonization duality, this suggests that the bosonization duality that we saw at large N is probably true even at finite N. But this is not a proof in as such, because you can't really at finite N you can't really follow these flows. But at infinite N you can. And okay. So now we want to ask some question about finite N things. Okay. So when you move away from infinite N in the 2th limit. And there is another class of operators in these theories, which we'll call like some local defect operators. Why do we call them defect? I'll say in a moment. But there is another class of operators called monopole operators, which starts becoming important in the sense that if you are working in 2th limit, these operators they have very very large scaling dimensions. The scaling dimensions scale with n. But when you move away, so in infinite n limit, these are infinitely heavy, and you don't have to care about them, because these are very heavy states, very heavy operators. But when you are at finite N, you have to take care of these things. If you want to make any statement about duality between finite N theories, then you have to know about finite N spectra. And one of the things that comes at finite N are these monopole operators. So what are these monopole operators? So one way to define these monopole operators is by saying that these operators are operators which, when you insert at a particular point in your space-time, they create a magnetic flux around that particular point. And this tract can be implemented. So what would you like to do with? Okay, I gave you some definition of monopole operator. You could ask, what can I do with this monopole operator? How do I compute anything related to these things? Let's say correlation functions and so on. So how do I compute correlation functions in principle? So I want to insert these monopole operators into a path integral, and the way to implement this monopole operator in path integral is by allowing for gauge fields which have a prescribed singularity, this flux kind of singularity, magnetic flux kind of singularity around the point of insertion.
Now, how do I know what are the allowed kinds of singularities? For instance, when you've got an non-abelian gauge group, the different monopole sectors are not topologically distinct. Yet they are all supposed to correspond to different operators, I believe. What are the rules of this?
I think these monopole operators, the kind of singularities that you allow, are correspond to allowing gauge field configurations which have this specific kind of singularity, which is because of some unit charge magnetic monopole along, let's say, the Cartan algebra of your gauge group. You allow for arbitrary magnetic flux insertion, quantized magnetic flux in magnetic monopole insertion at those points. So this says that there is only some particular kind of gauge field singularities that are allowed.
I know, but this is somebody's prescription. Why is this the correct prescription? I mean, so let me ask more clearly. What we're doing is to give a listing of all the local operators of the quantum field. So this is not some prescription dependency, right? It's physical. It'll show up in the spectrum of the theory, right? So you're telling us something about the spectrum of the theory, and I want to understand in some clear way why this is the correct why these singularities are allowed and no one. Let me ask my question perhaps from state operator.
Yes, state operator now is.
It's clearer, okay, but I still don't understand it. Suppose we've got an SU2 theory, and then you allow configurations with flux 1 on the first U1, minus 1 on the second.
Yes.
This will be regarded as a separate monopole operator, separate configuration.
Yes.
On the other hand, this is not topologically distinct from no flux.
Yes.
And so, presumably, can also be formed by just putting enough photons in the no flux sector. So why do I think of it as a separate state? Why isn't it just some big excitation of the no flux?
You are saying if there is no quantum number which distinguishes between two
Yes.
operators, why are they different? But I mean,
It's not why are they different. Why can't I just create this monopole operator
yes.
by acting with enough of the normal kind of operator? Why should I expect that there's some relationship that tells me that the monopole operator is in fact some summary, some complicated function of the other operators? Or should I expect that? Should I expect a new state in the Hilbert space distinct from the Fock space? That's right.
I think people have studied this question, they have probably asked this question at infinite time. You can show that, I think at infinite time or very large end, I think people have shown this thing that these monopole configurations, even when their total magnetic flux is 0,
Yes.
You can ask about their stability. So you consider it as a state on S2, and you can ask about its stability.
Okay.
And I think at large enough n, people have shown that this is stable by itself. But if you move at finite n, this can start mixing with other 0 magnetic flux.
Okay.
So at finite n, they will mix with everything else. But this is like mixing between, I don't know.
No, but what I'm trying to understand is whether this is a separate configuration. Now, perhaps it then eventually mixes, but whether the number of states has increased because of considering this, or that this is just some bound state, can be regarded as some bound state of the photons on 0. I mean, and if I don't consider this, is this a calculational convenience? Or is it really a new state in the Hilbert space that cannot be built out of photons acting on the...
Yeah, I think so. For operators with a given magnetic flux, all different configurations, I think they can mix with each other, and probably they are just not independent of each other.
So you're saying this sounds like a calculation, okay?
This sounds like a calculus.
So I see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So. No.
Sorry to press you, but let's say when K and N are both small, these monopole operators are not particularly heavy, right? So this becomes a question you can't push away, to very great complexity. Because let's say the monopole operator has dimension 2, then there are very few things that can be built out of. So if it can be built out of something, we should be able to write down the relationship. But the monopole operator is, and there are very few candidates. So either it's true or it's not in a pretty simple way at small n.
Small n K coupled to some matter theory, I think
Yes.
that is monopole operator.
I mean, either they're distinct or not. I really don't know the answer. The impression I get from reading papers is that people think they're really different. That's the impression I got, but I'm not sure. You know my
There is no. I don't think at finite n there is any concrete evidence that they should be considered as separate.
What about in the supersymmetric one? Is that they distinct from other supersymmetric operators you can build out?
Distinct in what sense?
Distinct meaning there is no polynomial
Yes.
of matter operators, which has the same quantum numbers as the system.
So, the matter things, they don't carry any charge under, these magnetic flux things, right? So, what are the things under which this thing carry charge? So you can construct this, dual of F, the dual current of F.
Yes.
And these monopole operators are the only things which carry charge under that dual of F.
Yeah,
and
so from the overall U1, if there's a monopole which has charge and the overall U1, no question, because it carries this charge.
Yes.
But that's why I was asking for monopoles that have no charge under the overall. There's no conserved charge.
There is no conserved charge with distinguishing with same total M monopole operators. There is no distinct charge. And you can look at, for example, in this supersymmetric, index calculations and so on. You see that, these, when you match dualities, all these things, these monopole operators, they actually cancel operators,
made out of photons.
Made out of ordinary particles.
Exactly. So that probably they're not. Good. That answers it.
So in the partition function calculation, I should not include this module. In the sense that I should just consider the partition function over photon states.
I think there are equivalent ways of doing this thing. You can include them or not include them and change the other part in a compensating way.
So what you said just now is a proof that these states are actually some composites of photons.
So, in index calculation, you can see that they actually cancel ordinary operators, which are not made out of these flux centers.
So the monopoles don't carry any don't carry any charge under the dual current.
Yes.
They are indistinguishable from other insertion of photons.
Yes.
But when they have charge, they are not. They are distinct.
They are distinct.
Then they are really different.
So I'll say about this, you want topological current and the charge component to that. So I'll just come to that. Yeah. Okay. So as again, Shiraz was saying, these if you work in conformal field theories, then there is a slightly more intuitive way of defining these operators, which is via state operator correspondence. So these monopole operators translate to states on S2, which carry quantized magnetic flux on the S2 itself. And this quantized magnetic flux can be taken along the Carl-Concept algebra, and these flux states are labeled by some GNO charges. Again, each of these GNO charges by themselves are not conserved charges, but
Sorry, what's GNO?
you mean what is an expansion?
Yeah.
Goldjar, Felix, and
I don't know who became this.
GNO is whatever.
GNO charges is a fancy way of saying magnetic fields in each contact.
in each contact. Yeah, that's right. Yes. So now, if you consider three-dimensional gauge theories with gauge groups which have abelian factors, for example, U1, an overall U1 vector. In such gauge theories, you can take the field strength, the abelian field strength, which in this case is just the trace of F, and dualize it to form a current. This current is conserved just by Bianchi identity. So this is a conserved current that you can define. Now you can see that what are the things that are charged under this thing. You can see that ordinary matter fields, they are not charged under this topological current. What are charged under this thing are these monopole operators. They are the things that carry non-trivial magnetic flux on this S2. So monopole operators are the only things which are charged under this thing, and given a monopole operator which is labeled by some GNO charges, the charge corresponding to this U1 topological that the monopole operator carry is just the sum of all the magnetic fluxes. So this is in theories with some abelian factors. This is a good well-defined way of characterizing that, what is the difference, how is monopole operator different from ordinary matter field operators. Now, when you consider monopole operators,
by the Gauss law, this will translate to charge under the U1 factor of the global space. Sorry, let's say, yeah, right. Suppose you got fundamental matter, and then you just rotate all fundamentals. We have a global symmetry, rotating all fundamentals with the phase and anti-fundamentals with the opposite phase.
yes.
That this will be the same as your magnetic charge after factor of K.
With the Chern-Simons term,
With a charge.
yeah. So with the Chern-Simons term, the Gauss law, okay, with Chern-Simons plus if there is the Yang-Mills terms as well, then the Gauss law says that the flux is proportional to the charge. So the Chern-Simons equation of motion is
To the matter charge.
it is equal to the matter charge. So,
And the thing I did was just tell you what the matter charge is.
yes,
So these two are then related after a factor of K.
after that, yes.
Okay.
So, yes. Okay, so in presence of Chern-Simons terms, the Gauss law imparts electric charge to monopole operators. So if you consider a monopole operator which is labeled by some GNO charges, then this Gauss law constraint, the zeroth component of this thing, this imparts the electric charge to these monopole operators. So they are no longer gauge invariant. They start carrying electric charges because of the fact that they are carrying some magnetic charge. So in presence of Chern-Simons, if you want to construct gauge invariant monopole operators, you need to dress these charged monopole operators with fundamental fields to make them gauge invariant.
Tell us about the Fermat gauge invariance of supply.
Okay. So you look at the Gauss law constraint which comes from Chern-Simons terms coupled to matter fields. Okay. So the Chern-Simons part gives when varying with respect to A0. This gives the magnetic field, the IJ component. Okay. And on the right hand side, you will get just J0. J0 is just the charge, metal charge. So this says that if there is some object which carries magnetic flux, then it also carries an electric charge which is proportional to the magnetic flux with a factor of 2. So monopole operators carry this magnetic flux like this. So it also starts carrying electric charges proportional to the magnetic charges with a factor of 2. So this says that if I had a monopole operator in presence of Chern-Simons terms, it's not gauge invariant because it's carrying electric charge. So now you need to dress these monopole operators with matter fields to make them gauge invariant. For example, you can consider U and K Chern-Simons theory coupled to scalars, and then you ask what is the lightest monopole operator in this thing. So you turn on so I consider a magnetic field in which the total M is equal to 1, which can also be thought of as, for example, 1, 0, 0. The magnetic fluxes take this form. Okay. Then the Gauss law constraint tells me that it also carries electric charge, which is K along the car powers of the gauge. To make this gauge invariant, I need to dress this monopole operator, which I am calling V10. Zero vector means all zeros. I need to dress this up with some fundamental matter field. The fundamental matter field carries some charge under this thing. So some phi I component is if it's a vector representation, the ith thing carries charge Zi. Okay, 1 charge 1. So you can neutralize the gauge charge of monopole operator by dressing it up with a fundamental field to make it gauge invariant. So since its charge was K, the charge of their monopole operator was K, you need to attach it with K.
Anti-fundamental, right?
Yeah, if its charge is class, then you take power aspect.
Questions, right?
Yes.
Is there, why are you only allowing monopole operators with charge in the carton?
Why am I allowing?
Like with magnetic fraction?
You can use case transformations to rotate that thing into current.
He's asking why not non-commute? Why are they all commute? Of course, they commute
Commute with what?
with each other. Why? Because fluxes, why do they have to be commuted? I think that's the question.
So fluxes mean that you have taken, some
You've got some constant
some
f,
constant F. Yes.
and you're demanding that this constant f is a matrix such that the such that
If I given a constant matrix, which is adjoint representation,
yeah,
and always
sorry,
rotate
sorry.
into.
Yeah, there's just one.
You can just always rotate it along these directions, and these are the things. Okay. Okay. So now you see that this background bare monopole operator, it carries some energy, which will depend on what flux does it carries. But look at the gauge invariant monopole operator. It is dressed up with k factors of the fundamental field. If you are working in 2 limit, where k is large, this operator will be very, very heavy, just because of the fact of this phi 1 to the power k. Because phi 1 carries some finite energy, so taking to the power k, the gauge invariant thing carries infinite amount of energy in large k limit. So at weak coupling, even at finite time, but weak coupling k will be infinity, monopole operators are very heavy, and in particular also in the 2 limit where k is large.
ICTS. ICTS, you have a question? No, that's just no. Question from ICTS? Just continue.
Can somebody mute the mic?
ICTS, request that you mute your mic.
I think it's not great that we are only from those that can you check?
You can't hear us. Where's the power? Can you hear us now?
Yeah, we can hear.
Now can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear. We can.
Excellent. Please mute your end.
Okay.
It's only the computer.
So now discuss small mild puzzle regarding monopole operators in these non-superbosonization dualities. So if you look at the spectrum of these cities at infinite n, when monopole operators are not important, they just consist of an infinite tower of higher spin conserved currents, which are conserved at infinite n. And this spectrum matches beautifully on both sides of the duality, of the non-superbosonization duality. Okay. Now you ask that if I move away from infinite n, monopole operators start becoming important. Now you ask how do monopole operators map on both sides of the duality. So you would consider the lightest monopole operator on both sides of the duality.
Sorry. Suppose we take monopole operators 1 unit of flux. Okay. Should I think of them as transforming in some representation of UN?
I think that when you consider a state on S2 which has this particular flux thing, it breaks the gauge symmetry into U1 times UN minus 1. It's like adjoint thing taking a web, which breaks the gauge symmetry into the part which keeps it invariant.
And then I could, of course, rotate
This into any direction you want.
into any direction.
Yeah. But it breaks, if, for example, this particular flux vector, 1, 0, 0, 0, this breaks UN into U1 times UN minus 1.
Now, maybe my question, I mean, in the end, since you're only going to consider gauge invariance,
Yes.
maybe my question is not very clear. Because the configuration with the flux, but no matter, it comes in some family of configurations.
Yes.
And then you could, but I suppose they're, okay, probably. Thank you.
Okay. So now I want to look at monopole operators on both sides of the duality. What are the lightest monopole operator on both sides of the duality? Now, this duality again is a strong weak duality. So if one side is weakly coupled, the other side is strongly coupled. So on one side you can find out the classical scaling dimension of some operator. But on the other side you can't trust your calculation. You can say that if I were at weak coupling, what would be the dimension? But the dimension receives a large amount of quantum characteristics because the theory is strongly coupled on the other side. But let me anyway try to compare the weak coupling dimension on both sides. Now, the usual way, when there are two dual operators on two sides of a strong weak duality, the usual way things work is that, their large and scaling words correctly, and there is a lambda, there is a two coupling dependent factor which changes from strong coupling to weak coupling. So, you expect, as in other cases, that at least the large and scaling of these operators should have matched. And there could be, some lambda dependence that could be off between these two things. So let me consider the weak coupling dimensions on both sides. So if you consider the scalar theory, you see that you consider a monopole operator which has 1,0 flux, and then you attach it gauge into phi with some scalars, and the scaling dimension would be order k, just because phi has order 1 dimension. So the scaling dimension of phi in 3 dimension, in 0 flux sector it's half. But when you go into a flux sector, you see that the scaling dimension of operator phi, or the energy of phi, it becomes 1. So it shifts with magnetic flux. If you quantize the scalar field in the background of a magnetic flux, its spin shifts, its energy shifts. Yeah. So these are the thing about monopole spherical harmonics. So scalar monopole spherical harmonics have this property.
And that's what it does. I mean, I don't have to independently consider the dimension of the operator E.
Okay, so this, this you can, if you have a weakly coupled theory, you can try to compute the scaling dimension of this operator via state operator correspondence, and this thing doesn't have large, this thing doesn't have scaling dimension which scales with k. So the main contribution comes from this 5 to the power k.
At a classical level, its scaling dimension is 0.
Yeah, at classical level, its scaling dimension is 0. But if you move into weak coupling dimension, it will carry some dimension.
That's because of some Casimir energy.
Yeah, the scaling dimension comes from Casimir energy. Yes.
But I mean, classically, F carries no energy.
Yes.
Because there's no F squared term.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So, however, of course, the fact that it's there changes the quantization conditions of the matter fields.
The matter field.
So the 0 point energy of that thing changes, apart from the fact that you have the insertion.
Apart from that. Yes.
And that can be computed.
That can be computed.
It has been computed.
For example, if you consider QED with large number of flavors, people have computed the scaling dimension of monopole operator in these large NF limit. And people have shown that in infinite time limit, the scales as NF. This just comes from a free fermion computation. At large NF, the IR behavior of this QED coupled to large NF number of flavors is just free fermions.
And the calculation is basically just Casimir energy.
Casimir energy, yes.
In a monopole diagram.
In a monopole diagram, exactly.
But it wouldn't scale as N or as K, because I can think of this background as essentially a classical solution.
Yes.
In some, in a theory in which the saddle point parameter is n square, and therefore this is only the log determinant, which can depend on nf, of course, but it will not depend on n square.
And will not depend on n either, because only those guys in the one component, their Casimir energy.
So you turn on this flux. So only those scalars which carry, which are charged in this direction will contribute.
So some order.
Yeah, order. Okay. Now, so this operator has scaling dimension of order k. Now you can consider in the fermionic side. On the fermionic side, you want to again neutralize the gauge charge of this bare monopole operator. Okay. But what are the things with which you can actually neutralize it? Yeah. This is operator. This is some operator psi in the direction 1. But now you want to neutralize it. Let's say that I'm working in a theory in which the number of flavors is just 1. So I don't have many flavors, just one single flavor. So now I want to neutralize the k amount of charge of this bare monopole operator by attaching these things. But you see, I cannot attach arbitrary number of them because these are anti-commuting objects. If I try to, so let's say psi is a 2-component object, right? So I can try to attach psi alpha, psi beta. Once I attach the third one, this will become 0. So I cannot attach arbitrary powers of psi. I can attach arbitrary powers of phi because it's a commuting object, but not psi. So I need to put in derivatives to make them distinguishable from each other.
What is the energy of psi in the monopole background?
It's again shifted by half. So the classical thing was 1. Now this will be 3 by 2.
And derivatives remain there.
And derivative remains the same. So now you want to neutralize. You want to put enough number of these phi, psi, d, psi, and so on, higher and higher powers of this thing. So you can estimate the scaling dimension of this thing. What is the scaling dimension contribution just from these various psis that you have put in? You can estimate it. It turns out to be k to the power 3. So now you have a naive problem between these two things. Though again I have done classical computation on both sides. Again the expectation that their large n behavior should have been the same is not quite clear. So you would like to understand, if I would, let's say this is correct, let me take this Fermionic theory to be at weak coupling, and the dual theory of scalars would be at strong coupling. So there would be some shift, but I would like to understand how is this change in power of k happening. So this is a nice problem. So it's not like directly concrete problem that I'm actually computing something. It's just a comparison, but it's not working. So this is a nice problem here.
How does the charge counting work out with the number of psi insertions? I mean, what do you exactly do?
Okay.
How many psis do you do?
So let me say that my k is. So basically, let me say that my k is, let's say, if it were 2, I could have just put psi 1 and psi 2 to neutralize it.
Yeah.
So psi transforms in psi as an alpha index, which is final index, and another is the gauge index. So I want to take the gauge index to be 1 so that it carries unit charge into the direction which can neutralize this thing. But alpha can take 2 values. So just to neutralize two amounts of charge, I can just put this. But if it has 3 charges,
so the total number of psi insertions is k. Or
the total number of psi insertions is k, but I need to make them distinguishable from each other.
So you have to put in all the
Put in derivatives, yeah, and you need to put some number of derivatives so that you reach psi to the power k. You can count that numbers of d. What is the number of d?
And it turns out to be k to the power 3 half.
Yeah, it turns out to be k to the power 3. So this is a nice problem. So now we are stuck at this naive problem. So the next simplest thing to do would be to just move into the supersymmetric cousins of this theory and ask, does such a problem happen there as well? And if it happens, what is the resolution for it? So we want to just gain some intuition about about monopole operators from the supersymmetric theory itself. Now. So we will consider some n equals 2 supersymmetric version of these theories. So which have some u and gauge group, k is fundamental level, and some number of fundamental and anti-fundamental kind of multipliers. Now these theories are, if you do not turn on any sort of relevant or other coupling, these theories are super conformal. And n equals 2 super conformal algebra, you can know about the representation theory of this super conformal algebra. The representation of these things are labeled by scaling dimension operators, the spin and the arc. These are some 3 commuting things that you can find out in this algebra. And these are things that label states or operators or whatever representation you want. Now the global symmetry of this theory with these number fundamental, anti-fundamental is SUNF symmetry which rotates and a fundamental SUNA symmetry which rotates anti-fundamental. And if you didn't have any gauge field, you see that this symmetry should have been UNF and this should have been UNA. But one combination of the overall U1 is a part of the gauge U1. And the another part, which is the opposite combination, is the axial symmetry. So U1A is the axial, is the global symmetry. And then apart from that, there is the U1 topological symmetry because you are working as U1 gauge theory.
Another way of saying it is that combination is not quite the gauge. It would have been the gauge if the monopoles didn't carry charge.
Okay, yes.
So in fact, the Gauss law relates that U1 to U1 topology.
So the combination of that thing and U1 topological is gauge. Okay. So these are the global symmetries of this theory. Yes. Okay. Now, one good thing about supersymmetric or superconformal theories is that there are some quantities in these superconformal theories which you can compute, which are independent of the coupling constant of this theory. If there are continuous deformable coupling constant in these theories, then a so-called superconformal index is an invariant of those continuous couplings. This so-called superconformal index, it counts operator spectrum, but only a subset of the operator spectrum, not all. So, as I said earlier, these theories have n equals 2 superconformal symmetry in them. You can label states by various charges under the superconformal symmetry, and this algebra of the superconformal symmetry tells you that there are various different kinds of representation in this thing. So, there are some long representations which are generic, they are not annihilated by any of the supercharges, and then there are short representations which are annihilated by some of the supercharges. So those representations which are annihilated by some of the supercharges, they are usually referred to as short representations or BPS operators. Superconformal index counts this BPS spectrum of this theory. So it doesn't count the long representation, it counts only short representation, but within short representations as well, it counts operators with a minus 1 to the power f sign, which means that it counts bosons with +1, fermions with -1. So if there are some cancellation at any particular charge, they cancel out, and whatever remains is an invariant. Okay. So now these are the various fugacities that I can turn on, given the fact that I want to preserve some amount of supersymmetry, and you can show that the operators that contribute have 0, delta minus j minus r. So it's independent of beta. It only depends on this variable x, which counts scaling dimension plus the spin. And then you can have various non or global symmetries which you can turn on. So these are just some flavor symmetries that you can turn on.
What is little j?
Little j is the spin.
Spin.
Yes.
And the J3 is what?
Oh, sorry. I mean these to be the same thing. So this j and j3 basically. So this should become the j, the spin of the operator. Now
Delta minus j minus r equal to 0, classify your
classified. Yes. So any operator which doesn't have this property, doesn't have this thing equal to 0, doesn't contribute to this index. Okay. So this has been written as a trace over the Hilbert space of the theory, but this can also be written as a path integral on S2 plus S1 with some particular boundary condition along S1 which triggers some supersymmetry, and then this supersymmetric path integral can be computed by a supersymmetric localization.
So it is even if delta minus j minus r is not 0, yes, it still contributes to I. It will be scaled by e minus beta.
No, those things just don't contribute to this thing.
It's not obvious from the formula.
No. It's not obvious from the formula by itself, but so this delta minus j minus q, can be thought of as the anti-commutator of a particular supercharge with its Hermitian conjugate, and only states that contribute are the states which lie in the cohomology of that supercharge. I don't know that. But
you see, unless because q with q dagger is this thing, states that don't have that thing equal to 0 appear in pairs. Okay, with the same all this delta minus j minus r is the same. Okay, but one goes on, one follows. Yes, minus 1 to the end.
The same as in between.
Yeah.
And where is the information about the monopole sector here?
So this is just an abstract expression. Now, when I want to evaluate this as a path integral over S2 cross S1, via localization, you will see that monopole operators will appear in this thing. So there are BPF monopole operators in this theory as well, which will appear in this answer for this supersymmetric localization.
Now the monopoles can have a global Q1 charge. That does not appear here.
So you can. So if you are working in, so this is just a general expression. Now this Tn you can also consider in a human topological intent as well.
Okay.
Yes. So now this is the expression for the superconformal index of this thing. UMC gauge theory, which has level K and some number of parallel anti-parallel. Okay. Now this expression, this just comes out of some localization calculation, and this looks like a terrible expression, and you don't get any intuition out of it. So let me write it for a particular case, a particularly simple case. Say. So you consider a U2 gauge theory at some Chern-Simons level K. Okay, and I'm setting the R charge of the fundamental and anti-fundamental multiplet to be equal to half. This answer can be obtained for arbitrary R charges, but just for simplification, I'm setting the R charge of fundamental and anti-fundamental to be half.
And that's what it would be if it had a particular superpotential.
Yes. So if it had a quartic superpotential involving
the potential that would make it
any
superpotential. Yeah.
So for just for simplicity, I'm putting this R charges to be half. And I've done some rearrangement compared to this formula. And so now I'll just say how I like to think about it. I think a lot of people like to think about it like this.
So but formula, independent of how much supersymmetry you have.
So these are n equals 2 supersymmetric series. But with this particular R charge,
but if it happens to be n equals 3 supersymmetric, nobody can stop you.
Yeah. The only difference from n equals 3 and n equals 2 is just the change of R charge. That's all. The answer is the same. The R charge is different. That's all.
Yeah, the index, the great thing about the index is it doesn't even depend on the superpotential.
Yeah. Just through the R charge.
This 0 and Z2 contour integrals are just some counting device to get some particular power of Z1 and Z2 out of this expression.
Yes. So okay, if you just look at let's forget everything else and just look at these two things. These just say that you are doing contour integral along unit circles. So these integrals, they just essentially say that you want to pick out of all of this mess just only both z1 to the power 0 and z2 to the power 0. This is essentially, this is something like saying that I want to only pick up gauge invariant objects. You should think of these z's as exponential of holonomies. The zero mode of gauge field along the S1 circle. So the integral over z is in some sense imposing gauge invariance. Though that is not literally correct here, but
let me literally correct at n equals 0.
If at m equals to 0, this rest of the part, this just becomes quantum determinant for U2 integration, for U2 gauge integration. Then, if you set m equals 0 everywhere, this whole part is just U2 R measure, and you integrate and you get this U2 gauge invariance out of this thing. Again, each of these terms has some sort of meaning. Let me just say that thing. Okay. So now you should look at this thing in the following way. So if you look at this first term, this is if you turn on some flux sector, these m's are flux sectors, the monopole flux sector that we talked about just now. So these m's are flux sectors. If you turn on some particular flux sector, the gauge symmetry is broken to a subgroup which preserves that flux sector. For example, for 1, 0, 0, it was broken from un to un into un minus 1. So in any flux sector, it will be broken to some other subgroup. So if you look at this thing, this essentially, if you remove all the parts with non-zero m's, the rest is actually a Haar measure for the leftover gauge symmetry.
Yeah, that would be clear if this was not U2 but U something.
Yeah. So any non-zero m here will break it just to u1 plus u1. But m equals 0 gives you u2 R measure.
What are these x's exactly?
what are these X's? These X
Chemical potential.
chemical potential which measure this particular quantum number.
Okay. Sort of like the temperature. It's sort of like e to the power minus beta, except it also comes with e to the power minus.
And so, you remove all the M independent parts, that gives you some Haar measure for the, unbroken gauge loop, and then, the rest things will depend on M via this X. If you look at like localization calculation, they come from doing some one loop determinant of gauge nodes.
What comes from the one loop determinant?
So, if you turn on some generic flux which has everything non-zero, so everything is broken to U1 to the power n.
Yeah.
Right? In that particular background, these gauginos, which were matrices, adjoint matrices, they carry some non-trivial energy. There are some supersymmetric bonds which carry non-zero energy. And when you do in the localizing calculation, when you do the one loop determinant thing, that gives you this factor.
So the thing that deforms the Van der Waals
Yes.
comes from
gauginos. So, but this is a confusion. I'll come to the confusion later on, but let me just say about the rest of the part. Now, this factor, this you should think of as, the charge and energy carried by the flux background.
And that is exactly the Casimir energy. I could calculate that by getting the Casimir energy.
Yes. In a supersymmetric setting, you can just calculate.
So just one loop is exact, basically. Yeah. And there's no funny localization business. It's not like localization changes.
No.
In the real theory, I could calculate the Casimir energy. So that stuff is funny, but this stuff is
Yeah, this is funny.
Yeah.
But so there is this NF dependent part. Oh, sorry. So I was taking NF plus NF, so both are there. So this NF dependent part which comes from the contribution of this vacuum energy from the matter sector. Then there is this part. This comes from gauginos. Gauginos also contribute to this vacuum energy. So it has both parts. So this part you would also call some funny part because coming from gauginos.
Say that again, please. What part is the funny part?
So this part, this comes from the vacuum energy contribution from the matter sector.
Yeah, it's good.
And this part, this comes from
because there's no NF.
Yes. There is no NF, and if you look at this is some adjoint thing, right? M1 minus M2.
Yeah.
In general, it would be Mi minus Mj and summation over that thing. That comes from adjoint things.
Yeah.
So this comes from gauginos. And this part just is the usual thing that we talked about. If you turn on some fluxes, and in presence of Chern-Simons term, the background carries some charge. This Z1, Z2 measure that charge.
So let me ask the following question. So at large K, one should be able to reproduce this in some semi-classical way. Just doing coupling constant perturbation theory.
Within the
Without doing any,
Chern-Simons. Just Chern-Simons.
without doing
not
any funny localization. Just take the actual theory.
Yes.
Try to do Hilbert space quantizing and reproduce this. And then one should be able to interpret all these terms from that point of view.
This is what I also expect, but I don't see how would these terms would come. I have just no intuition. How would this thing come?
Nobody's done this calculation. Seok Kim and Madhu have done some calculation. Have you seen this calculation? They did when Madhu was postdoc here.
Seok Kim has calculated the index of ABGM theory. He used localization, right?
Seok Kim used localization. In a follow-up paper, they tried to interpret their formula.
Oh, I see.
Doing some Hilbert space thing, they could go all the way, but they did have something.
Okay. And then this rest of the part, this comes from some particular components of matter fields.
This is already an understanding.
This is
X's are the shifts because of spherical.
Because
more percent.
Yes. So this is exactly understandable. This, apart from this is also understandable. But this independence here in the bottom one and this extra part comes from gauginos, which we don't understand from just a pure Chern-Simons point of view. Because in pure Chern-Simons thing coupled to this thing without any Yang, there are no dynamical gauginos. There is auxiliary. I'm just integrating.
And it's not even like some strange K dependence. It's all one loop stuff.
Just one loop. Yeah, just one loop determinant.
So then it can't be too mysterious to understand, right? Because it's one loop. It's one loop in the physical theory as well. That's what the K dependence. It's not some non-perturbative stuff from the physical.
again, if I try to do this one loop thing, gating loop will never contribute.
I understand. Something else will contribute though.
Yes.
But whatever it is you do, take the physical theory, do a genuine one loop calculation, you should get this answer. Okay.
Okay. So this is just some way of looking at this expression. So you can again look at this.
Maybe the thing that's confusing is that these monopole sectors are presumably Euclidean fluxes in this index calculation. Is it totally clear that that is the same thing as fluxes in the Lorentzian theory?
I mean, when you do this radial quantization, then there is some non-trivial.
I mean, it's often the case that the Euclidean partition function, the quantum numbers of things in the Euclidean partition function are related to things in the actual Lorentzian theory by some sort of, you know what I mean, what's the word I'm looking for? Some sort of, like for instance, momentum and winding net. Poisson research.
Yeah, that is.
It may not be the case that these Euclidean fluxes are genuine, exactly. So it may not be the case that this formula has a, you know, there might be some rewriting.
Yeah, that could be true. But
it would be interesting to understand that because this is causing a lot of trouble in our case.
But this is your answer of localization, and we trust it for now. This is correct. And there is evidence that this is correct because this work non-trivially across duality. When you try to match dualities across mathematical theories, this matches non-trivially.
And it's certainly correct. No doubt. The localizations have always felt like magic. Yeah. I mean, it's correct, but somehow it doesn't always give you the answer in the nicest way.
Again, if you do localization, again, this localization depends on this. It doesn't depend, but
and it would depend on the deformation.
Yeah, but it looks like that it would depend on the deformation. It would give different answers. There will be probably somewhere related by this Poisson summation.
Exactly, and you are only interested in the answer, the frame related to the physical theory, not the localization.
Yeah, we have to figure out that how to make this physical theory.
Some bits of this look very similar to David John's formula in which is counting this conjugate operators for the equation, whatever,
Right. Right. But I presume he won't have the X in your mind.
Yeah, he probably doesn't have those. But he does have some deformation of the Vandermonde. I don't remember the context.
So this is just an example. Now, from this formula, you know that from this formula itself, you can read out, what are all the supersymmetric letters which are contributing to this formula, into this formula, or arbitrary NCKLF. The basic system. When using it up here, and then there is a particular derivative which is also supersymmetric, which you can also use. So if you look at this formula, then this product over J essentially is implementing arbitrary number of derivatives, this particular derivative. And these above parts are from fermions, these below parts are from bosons, as you would expect. Okay. And then for the
signs seem to be minus for both of them.
Sorry, again?
Because of the minus one again.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes.
And then you can read out charges of the bare monopole or the the charges for the bare background itself. And it carries it's a BTS thing, it carries energy and R charge which are equal to each other, and it also carries some global charges, some axial charge. It also carries, but it's invariant under the non-homogeneous SUNF plus SU and asymmetry.
As we discussed before, this formula seems to suggest that the flux carries energy even in the absence of matter.
Yes.
Which of course cannot be true. So somehow the interpretation as this as being the energy of that thing sounds a bit fun. I mean, it's of course the Casimir part is very clear, as you said. It's the Mi minus Nj part. Yeah, of course, it's not very clear because when you do the integral in the case without matter, you just get 1.
You should get 1.
And you will get 1 because all the flux sectors have nothing to cancel their charge against, the Gauss law. So that's just there for fun. It's there and it will never contribute, so there's no contradiction. But the interpretation of it sounds a bit odd. But okay.
This is, the fact that I'm interpreting it in this way is, you can take it just as a mnemonic. Eventually I will do some calculation, and the fact that I'm interpreting it in a certain way wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
What are these two charges?
So this is just the, I should have written delta, this is the scaling dimension, or the energy of the flux vector. And this is the R charge, they are equal. This is a BTS state, which has 0 spin, and this satisfies, if you remember, delta minus J minus R is equal to 0. So if J is equal to 0, then delta is equal to R, this is the same thing. Scaling dimension, this delta is epsilon, the same.
Yeah, that is one question. Do you think that in about half an hour or so, will that be enough? If not, we could schedule a second. That's the reason I'm asking. So I'm telling you, you're going at a great speed, there's no reason to hurry if Gautam thinks that's okay.
Yeah.
So we could either finish in half an hour or 40 minutes, or just take your time and stop at a convenient point and we could do a fast pace.
Okay, so if we try to... If you want me to go slow, then maybe...
Is the speed you're going now is great.
Yes, it's perfect.
Then let me continue for some time and see.
Just stop.
Okay.
Sorry, just moving on. So this being delta.
Yes.
Of course, she also has some doubt about the interpretation here. But if this was indeed delta, then the first term is some big, some n square order object.
This depends on what flux sector you are working in. So, for example, if you are working in this sort of simple flux sector, then this thing is just NC. NC.
Just
NC.
NC.
Yeah, so use that 1 and everything else 0, and this gives order NC number.
Yes, but in the counting of the this dressed monopole operator as in a comparison between this and that and so on. There you said that the delta of the V10 operator was essentially order 1. If you're saying it's order NC now, then that's a big change.
Again, this probably is related to the interpretation thing. So if this thing, in this calculation, this comes from some gauge zeros. Now, if you try to do just in the pure Chern-Simons theory and try to quantize things there, then you wouldn't get this term by itself because there are no dynamical gauge zeros in there. So there it would be something. So probably it's an interpretation issue. I don't know how to interpret this thing.
So, and just help me understand what this sum is over what?
This sum is
over all the fluxes?
If you are in some generic MI background, then you just sum over all MIs and just sum this thing. So for example, if it is 100 background, you can take MI to be 1, I to be 1, and everything has to be 0.
Yeah.
So this will give 1, 0, 0, NC terms, okay, basically NC minus 1 terms. And then when you take MJ to be 1 and this to be 0, everything, then this will also give NC minus 1. And this 1 hot factor will cancel this 2 thing, it will just give me NC minus 1. And if you set both of them to be not 1, it always gives 0. This is what NC.
But Gautam's question could be restated as follows. You could ask, what is the energy of the first term that comes from the monopole sector contributing to the index? Okay? And you had an x to the power k already. And then you're saying that in addition there's an x to the power nc.
Where was x to the power k? It was z to the power k, that was a charge.
Z to the power k, and then the Gauss law will force you to turn that into an x to the power k.
X to the power k.
Okay? But in addition there's an x to the power nc.
X to the power nc.
So, the first contribution from a monopole sector
Yes.
seems to contribute not at x to the power k, but x to the power k plus nc.
In the supersymmetric cases, this, if you interpret this thing as monopole operator energy, then this contributes at k minus nc.
Forget about the interpretation. We just say that the first contribution from m not equal to 0
Zero comes at
comes at this.
Yes.
Now, is there any way of interpreting that the quantity that it comes from? Is it the dimension of the lightest supersymmetric? I mean, is there some interpretation to it? Is it
This gauge invariant object, this by itself you would say that this is some operator, some gauge invariant operator, whose epsilon plus j is this k minus mc.
Yes, and can one identify the operator?
What do you mean? Identify this operator with
Write down a formula. I mean, you told us what a monopole operator. Can we say that this is the contribution of this monopole operator? I don't know anything.
But we are thinking of monopole operator as these flux sectors.
No, but the problem with that is that we don't see the x to the power nc from that one. And that was Gautam's question.
We should call the NC, rank NC.
You have to identify an operator with the right scaling dimension.
Yes. So, for example, this question again you could have asked in a U1 case theory. Right? In U1 case,
In the U1 case theory, there's no summation left.
no summation left. Just
So then there's no x to the power nc.
Yeah, there is no. Yeah, so I don't know how to reproduce this paper.
There is a k greater than n requirement here.
There's the k, just there is a k greater than required.
Because otherwise it would look very odd. Because if you have kept k fixed and taken n very large, this at the most doubles the dimension.
Yeah.
So the k versus k to the power 3 half that puzzle still remains.
So okay, you can these charges and interpret this as LP and R charge, axial charge and so on. Now, so now I look at the lightest. What is the lightest monopole operator here? In this thing, I'll just take 100 background and then put in some units of this matter quanta. You can utilize the charge, and the contribution comes like this. This can just be read up from the index formula. And this turns out to be this. Now, you could ask that,
Wait, let me understand all the what's R?
R is the R charge. Now I'm taking general R charge. If R is general R charge, then this is
And where is that where is this NC contribution we were just talking about?
this is this NC.
So it comes with a minus.
It comes with a minus.
Because that term has a minus sign.
Oh, so it lowers the dimension.
Yeah.
So suppose I took K is equal to NC. That's allowed.
K equals MC. So in these supersymmetric theories, that there is a condition which says that the combination of K, NF, and MC cannot be less than 0.
But up to, let's say NF was 1. So up to shifts of order 1.
Yes.
K is equal to NC is allowed.
Yeah, you can.
So then this thing gives you a modification for very light operators.
Yes.
When K is equal to NC, even though K goes large, NC goes large, you get modifications at operators order 1.
That is correct. But again, this thing in a UN theory, this will come with an extra fugacity which distinguishes this from ordinary non-monopole operators.
But suppose I go to the SUN theory.
Yes.
It's there anyway. But just the point is that there is a correction, even at large angles, there is a correction at energies of order 1 in this particular case. By K is there between. Is that odd or not? I thought that monopole operator should just decouple at large. Again, it's this interpretation issue. But it's becoming quite serious issue.
So you want to work at large end, large scale, and you will see how does this.
In the lambda going to one limit only, it becomes order 1.
Yes.
Otherwise, of course,
Otherwise it's always
order NC again.
Yeah. But there is a theory, namely
Yeah.
K is equal to NC. Or K is equal to NC plus 1. So, you know, is 1.
Yeah.
In which this new sector contributes an order 1, not order n. What should we make of that? Of course, there's probably a nice dual interpretation. But very interesting. Please have it.
So this is your lightest monopole operator that you would imagine in this thing. That neutralizes its charge by a scalar, which is the lightest thing, lightest matter particle.
Yeah, but as we've been discussing, this formula is very impressionistic.
Yeah. Okay. So now you would consider that the Gideon-Kutashov dual of this 3D n equals 2 theory, and you would ask again in that theory I would consider some 1-0 flux sector. Again, I am considering this 1-0 flux sector.
So when we say K meaning mod K.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this is mod K, correct. So this should be mod K. Now, okay. So now you consider the Gideon-Kutashov dual of this theory. Okay. Now, what is the Gideon-Kutashov dual? Yeah. Okay. So the Gideon-Kutashov dual of the theory that we considered earlier. So now let me consider a specific case of Gideon-Kutashov. Now I'm taking both fundamental and anti-fundamental to be same. This was the original Gideon-Kutashov. Later on, people generalize for different NFL. Okay. So this is the duality. On the other side, you also add some mesonic operators and some superpotential. Okay. And where this dual rank of the dual theory is related to the original theory parameters like this. Okay. And then there is a condition that this dual rank cannot be negative. It should always be positive. Otherwise, there is supersymmetric breaking in these theories. Okay. Now, in this dual theory, you can ask again. I want to consider what is the lightest monopole operator, lightest BPS monopole operator that I can get out of the index. Okay. Again, I'll consider same 1-0 flux sector on the dual side, and again I'll trace it with some scalar operator. The scalar operator will again carry the same energy, and the answer for that monopole operator's contribution would exactly be like this, with only difference being this NC becoming NC dual. Right? Yeah. And another difference that could be there is that this R is the R of the dual theory.
But in the N=3 case,
yeah, for example, it's just half, or it's just some R going to 1 minus R for general R. Okay. So now you can ask, is under these transformation, is this thing invariant? And you can see that this is not. So now you have some nice problem again. That you are considering lightest supersymmetric monopole operator on both sides, and again they are not matching. Okay. Now, for this you need to look slightly more carefully into the index, and you'll see that in most of the cases, for whatever value of k and of nz you choose, which is consistent with supersymmetry, this lightest monopole operator that we have just considered doesn't actually survive. It cancels against some other contribution. So what is the contribution that it cancels against? What is the mechanism? How does the cancellation occur? Okay. So you have to notice one particular thing, the value of charges of this. So consider this gauge of particle here. So if I am working in this 1-0-0-0 flux sector, then phi 1 carries some x charge, which is r plus half, and some z1 charge, and then there is phi 2, which carries just, there should be an M or yeah. 5 carries just R and a Z with it. Okay, in general, some 5 I. Other components, other n components of this thing. Okay. Now you see the way we constructed our monopole operator earlier, it was from this background and you neutralize it with phi 1 to the power j. But I can see that, okay, let me write down the charge of this lambda 1 2 object. You see that this lambda 1 in general lambda 1 I object, so this carries a factor of z1 and zi inverse. It's a gauge charge of this thing just because it comes from the adjoint representation, and it carries a factor of x to the power exactly into compensated half. You should be able to see. Yeah. So you need to sum this epsilon and j, and you see that this comes with this extra factor. Exactly the factor. Okay. So using this thing, you will see that phi 1 and phi I lambda 1 I. This particular combination, they carry same x contribution, but one of them is bosonic and the another one is fermionic. Because lambdas come with negative signs. So you see that if you replace one of these phi 1s with this phi lambda, you still give a negative contribution, but with same power of x, same contribution of x. So this is a potential candidate which can cancel it. Now to actually work out whether this can to what extent can replace many more of these ones, not just one, but 2, 3, 4, and so on, depending on how many lambdas you have. If you have only, let's say, 5 lambdas, you cannot replace more than 5 of these things because lambdas are anti-commuting; they will start vanishing at certain points. So you can replace some of them with these particular factors, and then you have to sum all their contribution, and then see what is the thing that remains. So this is the computation that you need to do to see what is the thing that survives. Okay. So in some cases, what will happen is that this operator, this will just cancel out completely, and then you need to consider other operators, other neutralization thing. For example, you need to put in some fermions.
Sorry, just to be clear, when you're doing this, now you're really considering the Lorentzian here. I mean, you're not doing this funny. The dimension you associated with this is just Casimir energy plus.
So this you should think of as, I have some expression for index.
Yes.
I'm just expanding that. In terms of these symbols only. Each of those things, I associated some symbol to it.
I see.
I'm just evaluating the index particularly.
I see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is just some mnemonic for that. Okay. Yeah. So you see that, this naive operator that we wrote down here, this actually cancels with something, some other contribution in the index. And then you need to do actual computation to see what is the leading contribution that eventually survives.
So actually, I didn't understand this. So that in the index, there is a leading contribution that clearly survives.
Yes.
Oh, you're saying that the part that I thought was x to the power k is more complicated.
It's more complicated, yes. Because the thing that eventually will survive will have much more complicated.
I see. Because there are many different gauge invariants you can make, and there are cancellations.
And then, so you need to find out what is that exactly.
So it does not start at x to the power k. It doesn't start at x to the power k plus nc by any chance? So that it cancels the other.
What factor it starts at depend on some range of what range of you have chosen for k, nc, and nf. In some particular range, it will have some particular form and some particular way in which it depends on x. So there are, in these particular series, there are 4 different ranges. This is the thing that I already told you. And then, okay, the thing that I said, you can just implement it on Mathematica or try to do it by hand.
But so in the place where n and k are both large and comparable, the case where we were worrying about,
Yes.
does it start? I was saying that it looks like it just starts at 0.
So so this is again these are the listings. So these are the regions in which you want your to be, and depending on which region you are in, the operator which survives. So this is just a schematic form. You should just look at this number. This is the number that survives. Leading contribution.
Okay, let's look at number 3. Number 3 is, I mean, let's say NF is 1.
Let's say NF is equal to 1. Okay.
Okay, so NC is rather than, and NC is greater than NC. No, NC can't be greater than K. I think. K has to be greater than NC.
No. The only condition from supersymmetric thing is that the combination of this thing, the dual rank should be positive. So the combination that has to be positive is K plus NF minus NC. This should be positive. This is the only condition.
Sorry. Yeah, I understand. So I think I'm interested in region 2. K is greater than NC is greater than NF. Okay. Yeah. Now in this region, where does it start?
Okay. Now this starts at. Okay. So this starts with x to the power of this particular K plus NF. So this should be K mod. Okay. K plus NF minus NC. K plus NC minus NF. This is plus NC.
K plus NC.
Yes.
So that minus NC is gone.
It's gone. Yes.
So that was just some artifact of the way of writing that. It just didn't. It was just. The final answer of the index doesn't see that. That's just some representation of the integral that doesn't survive the integral. It just there's some rewriting that makes it nice. Almost that.
Of course, you shouldn't be happy with K plus NC or something like that either, because you are looking for K to the power 3 now.
Yes. So okay. Again, so these are all the listings that you can get. Okay. So we tried this for various different cases, and then we find out that depending on what region you are in, this is the leading contribution that you find out, and you can also find out their global charges and representations under famous symmetry. Now all of these are everything is linear in NC and K.
Yeah. Now in this particular case, both sides had bosons.
Both sides have bosons. That's correct. Yes.
So there
is no problem as such.
Yeah.
The problem will come when you consider a theory in which you have only one chiral multiplier. And you consider a particular monopole operator which scalar can't utilize. Then you will have fermions to utilize it. And that will have large dimension in some particular problem. So in all these cases, the monopole operators have order NC scale dimensions. There's some factors here and here, but they are all linear in NC. Okay. Now I have not put in the table for the chiral case where there are none of these things. So these are just these statements that I've already said. Yeah. Okay. Now you could ask. Regardless of duality, this is a listing within one side of the theory. Now you can ask, how does this thing behave under duality? Does this mapping is consistent with duality, the GK duality or the Gibbon-Kutuzov duality or not? Because the Gibbon-Kutuzov dual of this theory is also again a U and C gauge theory with some shifted rank and the same Chern-Simons level, same number of flavors. So they will also have exactly similar kind of expression with just some MC going to MC dual. Okay. So you can ask again, does these leading answers, these are the things that actually survive. So these should match under the duality. And this you can check. This is an easy exercise to check that this expression, this answer 2, region 2 and region 3 under duality, they are invariant. They map into themselves, and the answers again are invariant under duality. While these two 1 and 3 they map into each other. They transform into each other, and again you can check that if you do the dual transformation, you go into.
And just to check this again, this is the listing for the lowest dimension.
Lowest dimension monopole operator, where just total m is equal to 1. And this basically comes from this 1, 0, 0 sector. You might think that there would be 2 minus 1 and so on, but you can check that they are higher order in X.
What is NCD?
NCD is the rank of the dual theory.
For the dual NCD.
Yes, which is exactly this number. Do you want to stop here, or you want?
You have we could go on for another hour at some point. You feel?
Maybe not an hour, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes.
What is it?
If I go slow, like I'm going right now, then otherwise.
Yeah, I think because if you want to sort of end at 1:30 or something like that, then you have to compress half an hour.
And so you don't have to discuss.
Yeah. Then it doesn't make sense.
So let's stop. We have to find time. Sunil is talking tomorrow. And do you know Surakata?
Yeah,
Maybe I can come to you.
Yeah, I knew that he was talking, but I somehow assumed that he was talking on Monday. But
No, he would make it on Monday. Tomorrow he called me and said, can you come tomorrow at 11:30?
Sure.
I said 10 o'clock, he said 11:30.
Yeah.
Now he will sit here.
Yeah. How long are you here?
I'll be here
Or
actually on till 30th of April.
Excellent. So we can have like any day next week. Yeah.
What about Tuesday? 11:30, is that?
So on Monday, I'm going to Pfizer again, give the same talk there. I'll talk to Sunil about that thing. But after that, any day.
Anyway, Monday we have a quantum space next.
Tomorrow, because
It's so much things. Talk about that. I would say spread it out. Will people be able to remember till Tuesday? Is that okay, Baba?
Fine.
Thanks. We'll find the time. Yeah, we'll find the time. Okay.